past. It's 4:15. Can I please ask all officers and guests to turn off their cameras? You should turn on your camera and microphone when you speak, but please turn them back off again afterward. Could I please... Oh, Michelle has started the recording. Okay. Prynawn da, croeso I cyfarfod, diolch I chi gyd am dod. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and may be broadcast via the authority's internet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the authority. Before we go on to agenda items 1 and the following, I'd like to ask members to hold a minute's silence on behalf of our deeply respected colleague, Howard Barrett. As you all know, that Howard was a former cabinet member for Neighbourhood Services and did actually attend these meetings when we first started in 2017. So I'm just going to start a minute's silence now. Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, we're going to go on to agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Michelle, have we got any?
Apologies received, Chair, from Phil Starr, Co-op D, and Councillor Lee Davis.
Lovely, thank you, Michelle. Agenda item number 2, declarations of interest. If anyone's got anything? No? Okay. Agenda item number 3 is a report on identifying options for the collection of absorbent hygiene products, and it's going to be presented by, I think it's Ewan Pearce and Owain Griffith. For today's meeting, our committee members will receive a report scrutinising the information supplied by officers and providing relevant challenge to the report content, gaining clarity on the current and future plans. Guys, if you want to give a brief introduction to the report, and because just a brief one, because members should have gone through the report already. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Councillor. I've actually got a presentation prepared. If you'd like me to run through that quickly.
Fantastic. Yeah, lovely.
I shall share that now quickly. But yeah, just quickly. My name's Owain Griffiths. I'm a regional advisor with RAP. My colleague Ewan as well. RAP is a charity. Our aspect of the work is the Collaborative Change Programme, funded by Welsh Government, and we've been working with. Bear with me if this. Let me know if this comes up. It's very slow my side. But yeah, we've been working. I can't actually see it, so let me see if I can find that now. Right, there we go. Yeah, we've been working with with Meath Council now, well, basically since pre-service change to your current collections, and this is a piece of work we've been asked to do recently, which is sort of data-driven piece of work looking at I suppose an assessment of the viability of collection of hygiene products at the moment. So just really quickly, that's what I intend to run through. Looking at our predictions on data, of customer data and available tonnages, then looking at the collection data, so resource requirements, and then the cost of collection, the cost of haulage, if that were to be applicable, cost of treatment at an API recycling facility, what that would do for the authority's performance, and then our observations from RAP and the conclusions for the work. So the first few slides I'm going to really skip through. These are just intended really to kind of demonstrate that our workings were fairly sound. Ewan actually did all the sort of number crunching on this, but basically based on sort of medical evidence, it's estimated that about 19% of any population may use AHPs. So absorbent hygiene products, that obviously goes beyond just nappies. It's also adult hygiene products as well, for adults with incontinent issues. In Merthyr, that's 19%. 90% of properties is 5,335. Based on evidence elsewhere, we've seen a 60% sign up generally as an average. So that's 3,201 households in Merthyr. And believe it or not, what we can actually do from composition analysis, which basically assesses what's in bins across Wales. There's been a number of detailed studies on that, and basically in Merthyr that sort of predicts it's 607 tonnes per annum, or each household that does produce them. So of those 3,201 households, they'd be producing about 190 kilos a year. Those were our predictions, or Ewan's predictions. When we benchmarked that 190 kilos against what authorities are collecting in real life, the Welsh average was 181 kilos a year. So we felt that was a really good sort of robust assessment on how much would be available. In terms of collection, we use GIS, Geographical Information System, to assess basically the drive time around the county. Because it's a 60% take-up on 19% of properties, it's about 1 in 11 households would be serviced, we estimated. So actually there's more sort of driving around the county than actually collecting. So we assessed those times and also assessed 3 tipping locations, one being Nappy Cycle in Ammanford, which is the only available nappy recycling facility in Wales, if not the UK, at the moment. We also modelled a hypothetical tipping location in Merthyr. Now we have to say that there was no site really assessed for that. You know, as the report says, Unit 20, the current bulking location, doesn't have capacity. So we just, this was dry times only. So in all our work, there is no site development costs included, which we'll come back to in a bit. Same with Silent Valley. So Silent Valley is Blaenau material handling location. We just assumed basically that there would be capacity there. We didn't assess any handling costs either, but it was just more like what would the drive times be were materials to be hauled from either Merthyr or Silent Valley as opposed to direct delivered. So next slide here, what you'll see is the pass rate there, because obviously Merthyr, there's no real drive time associated with tipping. You're already in the county. Silent Valley is a slightly further drive time. That's Ebbw Vale way, so you know you'd be up the heads of the valley tipping there. And then Ammanford is about an hour each way, so there's a longer drive time. So you'll notice across the top line, the number of properties that could be passed by a vehicle every day drops. But from the second line down, what you'll see is that at no point for any of those locations is more than 2 vehicles required. So in fact, if you were to tip in Merthyr, you'd only require you'd be using 1.2 vehicles worth of resources in a day. You can't get away with one, that's obviously too much. But what that means, if you were tipping in Merthyr, then guys are going to be working for about 4 hours per day on those 2 vehicles. Same as Silent Valley, you'd be using 1.4, basically 1.5 days worth of work over those 2 vehicles. Ammanford 1.7. So we felt it was very easily achievable to direct tip in Ammanford. You can see the 2 bottom lines there, the sort of mass is basically how much the vehicle can carry. So it's only 1.2's worth of loads. Obviously there would be 2 loads. Loads per day per vehicle, it's only 0.7. So there is capacity if the modelling was wrong. That's like slightly out, miscalculated. There is capacity time-wise and weight-wise or volume-wise to collect more. But yeah, as you say, all options serviceable by 2 vehicles there. So in terms of collection costs, what we've done is we've taken vehicle costs, we annualise those over the same period of time that Merthyr, the county annualises its collection vehicles. So 2 of those, vehicle costs there. We allow for an element of spares as well. Fuel is based off GIS. Labour is based off the authority's own staffing rates. SACS is based as well off sort of standards cost rates. depot costs, again, we sort of made an apportionment assessed for that. But as you can see, the sort of collection costs there would be about 189,000. If the authority did want to get a spare vehicle, because obviously when one of those vehicles goes off for servicing or repair, leaves with one vehicle. If the authority did want another one, it'd be another 11,000 per year. But also officers as well really thought that to ensure, you know, the administration of the service and to ensure that customers were using the service correctly, an additional warden would be required. That's at a cost, again, an authority provided cost of 25,000 per annum. Haulage costs, as I say, we did this just to work out how many skip movements would be required were the authority to haul materials. So the example here is if you were to tip in Merthyr, you can see those haulage costs there would annualise out at about 26,000 per annum. But again, to really stress this, there's not capacity in Unit 20. For the purpose of this report, we sort of in RAP we made the assumption that the most sensible option was to direct deliver. If the authority was to not do that, then you're basically looking at costing up, you know, a new depot location, potentially, you know, having facilities into that. You may well need a waste management license. You could possibly operate under an exemption, but there could be sort of considerable additional expense to that. And I think, as I said earlier, with Silent Valley, we made the assumption that you'd be able to tip there. We didn't check whether there was availability for this. We're just sort of making the assumption that there was. And again, we didn't include the costs of that sort of handling fee that you might be charged. In terms of the actual disposal and treatment costs, obviously the authority is currently paying for treatment of nappies at the moment within the residual waste stream. So if you remove those 607 tonnes, you'd be looking to pay, you know, the nappy cycle fee. That's actually £60 a tonne more than the current energy from waste contract. So when that's applied over 607 tonnes, it's an additional £36,000 per annum. So a quick summary of the total costs. Again, as stress that this is direct delivered into Ammanford at present. So collection 189, warden 25k, and the treatment is 36. So it's, at the moment it's about 250. Again, to reiterate that, if you did want a spare vehicle, it'd be about another £11,000 per annum. And we did actually cost up if ever a third vehicle was needed. That might be another 80-odd thousand pounds per annum. But I think we were fairly confident and fairly comfortable within the modelling there that you would be able to get away with 2 collection rounds. So the next slide now is basically about what that would do for the performance increase. Nappy Cycle is currently reporting a recycling rate of 54%, but you're already achieving a recycling rate from the energy from waste process when nappies are in the residual waste stream of 20%. So of that 604 tonnes, you're already achieving a recycling rate of about 120 tonnes is classed as recycling. So as you can see from the graph there, we modelled a number of sort of recycling rates from Nappy Cycle, and it's fair to say at the moment there's not necessarily comfort that recycling rate may be sustained over the long term. The process is currently, I think to our understanding, the process is counting the reprocessing of water within the recycling process. If that was to change, then the recycling rate might actually drop. It's possible the recycling rate might drop down towards what you're actually achieving from energy from waste. But as things are, best case scenario, you'd be looking at a 0.7% increase, dropping down to 0.2 if the recycling rate achieved from the reprocessing drops to about 30%. And again, just to stress this, that while Nappy Cycle is in action at the moment, it is really the only viable option for anyone wanting to treat AHPs. There isn't another one available. There was an exercise that was going on, led by local partnerships, with Rhondda Cynon Taf as the lead authority, trying to secure certainly a sub-regional AHP facility. At the moment, there's not been a significant amount of progress on that, and that may be worth something as well that's perhaps considering in the future. In terms of our observations from the process and the modelling, separate collections of AHP are normally introduced in authorities where the restriction of residual waste is really tight. and if you're living in a household where AHPs are being produced, you would exceed the capacity of residual waste available. From other work streams that we're doing with the authority, we're finding that is probably not the case. Merthyr actually has quite high residual waste arisings, and the 140 litre wheel bin collected every 2 weeks currently means that most householders producing nappies probably don't need to have a separate collection, providing they recycle their standard household waste. So that's a pretty important point there. As I say, Nappy Cycle is the only available facility, and also we didn't actually sort of assess whether capacity is available. We didn't speak to Nappy Cycle on that. That would need to be checked. As I say, the recycling rate at Nappy Cycle may not be sustainable over the longer term. It may well drop. So that's potentially a significant risk with the authority to implement collections. And another important one, if that were to happen, if something were to happen, recycling rate at Nappy Cycle were to drop, or indeed Nappy Cycle couldn't accept materials anymore for any reason, that may well produce difficulties of collecting separately or separately collected nappies, because that then becomes a separate waste stream. At the moment, your energy from waste contractor is able to accept nappies because it is mixed with domestic waste. That's then classed in a European waste code as general waste. However, if you were to separate it, it becomes nappies. I don't think your current reprocessor, your energy from waste processor, actually has a separate, is permitted to accept nappies separately. That would need to be checked. But also, if you were then to have to sort of remingle rather than direct deliver and sort of remingle AHPs with your residual waste, that also creates permitting issues that you're not currently permitted to do. So again, there's some potential, perhaps future issues around that. But then basic conclusions are, as we said, the cost is approximately 250 per annum. Could potentially be more, possibly considerably more, if you were to bulk, certainly within the authority. Maximum performance gain is relatively small, 0.7%. However, with relatively high residual waste arisings, there's certainly scope for the authority to drive more recyclables out of the residual stream. And should at some point in the future further residual restrictions be implemented, then separate collections of AHP would definitely be a useful tool for the authority. So a very quick scoop through there. I shall close this down and happy to take any questions from anyone.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, Owain. Have any members got questions? Okay, Councillor Clive Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I will ask questions for clarity and other questions in relation to other local authorities. If perhaps we can start, Chair, on page 11, where it says there, one of the bottom paragraphs, similarly, no data is available on the number of customers would potentially use such a service were it to be introduced. I presume from that statement, Mr. Griffiths, what you said is you got no idea how many customers would use this service in Merthyr Tydfil, although you've quoted a figure which is used in a particular matrix of 60%. And frankly, if this happened and the local authority introduced it, I'm sure there would be an education programme with all and sundry about utilising this service, so that 60% could be higher. But we start off on a base where you were saying we've got no data on the potential number of customers.
That's right. Yes, Councillor. I mean, without a service in place, we had to obviously make an assumption about how many we did. So that assumption is based on observations from other authorities that have implemented services. And I think, as I said, it was kind of cross-checked against the potential mass available per household. let's say 190 kilograms per household was in the assumption. So when you take 190 kilograms per household and reference that against what's being collected in other authorities, that matches up quite closely to what other authorities are seeing. So it's almost like a sort of triangulation almost. So the assumption on 60% ties in with the sort of number of customers and the mass collected. So all in, it gave us a reasonable degree of confidence that that's what could be expected. I hope that makes sense.
So just to make sure I got it completely clear, part of the evidence for this is based on, you say you've had data from, there's 8 authorities running this service in Wales. Is that data from those 8 fed into the conclusion about the 60%?
Well, I think, yes. Do you want to? I mean, you
yeah. So there's 2 things. That there's obviously the mass of material. That comes from the analysis that we did of the waste compositions. That 607 tons comes from that, and that squares quite well with what we've seen elsewhere in other authorities. The 60% number, I mean, that is, a best estimate. There isn't a huge amount of data out there to prove or disprove that figure. Right. The whole methodology of calculating potential customers is just that. It is an estimate. So, I mean, 60% of a figure that we've already estimated. So there is a certain margin for error. I mean, I think we've got more confidence in the mass collected, perhaps, than the actual number of customers. So there's stronger evidence for we wouldn't collect more of the material, maybe from fewer or more customers, but I think we're quite confident on the actual tonnage of material collected.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up as well, and I mean, not to forget as well that the 8 authorities that have delivered this have also implemented awareness campaigns as well. So it would be a sort of similar process, I would expect, to what Merthyr would do.
Right. On page 12, second paragraph down, it actually starts there. There is limited direct evidence from local authorities currently relating to the number of service users or potential service users within each area. So that goes back to the point I'm attempting to make, is that whichever you look at it, the data you're working on seems to be limited.
Sorry, Councillor. I'm struggling to find the references that you're.
Yes, page 12.
Of the report.
Yeah, if I can just interject, sorry, Councillor Jones, 0191 won't have the same page numbering as us, so if you can refer to the pages on the actual report, because they're obviously not using modern.gov.
That's a bit awkward, because the only page numbers I've got, and I've got the written report in front of me, I haven't got any other page numbers there. But
it might be up the top right-hand corner if you're on the appendix.
Or otherwise, it's 01 and 01.
I'm on a report which says the first question I asked was headed background, the top of the page, and then you turn over and it says methodology.
Yeah, it's page 4.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll try and explain a bit more. I mean, that section we did an all Wales modelling project for Welsh Government based on this, and at that period of time there weren't anybody offering this kind of collection scheme. So the background kind of goes into the methodology that we came up with to estimate numbers. So at that period in time,
right,
there were very few. There weren't any authorities offering this kind of service. I mean, further down in the report, we do then try and compare the situation there against what we've benchmarked with other authorities. But ultimately, I mean, the methodology is, it's a way of estimating numbers where data doesn't really, a huge amount of data doesn't really exist. What we've done, we've tried to compare what we've estimated against what subsequently has been found in other authorities, and the two data sets do match a bit more. So that gives us some confidence in the estimates that we've come up with.
Right, because the same paragraph goes on to say then, data may be available from authorities that currently run AHP collection services, but the majority do not.
Yeah.
So I think I've heard Mr. Griffiths saying that there is some data that you fed into this from the 8 authorities.
Yeah,
but
it
says that data may not be available, may be available from authorities that currently run AHP collection services. So I presume from there that you've obtained little data from the current 8 authorities who are running it.
Yes, so subsequent, further down in the report, we undertook a benchmarking exercise to try and compare the estimates that we came up with at the beginning with actual data. So that's ultimately what we've done. But yes, I mean, ideally, you'd have more data to go on, but unfortunately, that's not the case in this instance.
On the same page, well, it's page 4 with yourselves, page 12 with us, there is a block there stating age group, female, male. That block there, you've got the age groups from 0 to 4 up to 80 plus. Can you tell me where you've got these figures from? Because obviously they're not from Merthyr Tydfil.
No, it's basically from a series of medical journals. It's basically the prevalence of urinary incontinence. So this kind of basically we're trying to explain the methodology behind. We needed to, without data, we needed to come up with a methodology to try and estimate the potential number of people affected by this issue. There's not a huge amount of data available, so we had to come up with some sort of methodology, that we can, that we can try and hang a hat on ultimately. So that table there is basically a breakdown of something that we obtained from a medical journal, which is what we based the methodology upon, in terms of people who would be potentially requiring this kind of a service. I mean, ultimately, it is an estimate. There's no data that we can.
There's surely potential for getting that figure from at least 2 organisations locally, and that's the local health board, and in our case, or any the other 21 authorities, social services, because both of them, via their district nurses and domiciliary care staff, deal with individuals who use incontinent pants. So the data, in my view, must be available for both of those to feed into any information you've got.
Right. Well, we weren't privy to that data. Certainly, when we wrote the report. If the data is available, then we can certainly evaluate that. But when we did the work, that we didn't have that data.
I don't think either, Councillor, that's unlikely to capture everyone who's actually using such products as well. Because some people will be buying them of their own accord, won't they, without actually necessarily involving the NHS.
Yeah.
So by using that figure, it could undermine it. But or like underestimate it rather. But I think the point really to make to yourselves is the fact that, as Ewan said, this is the methodology upon which the assumptions for Merthyr were based. And if you scroll down the document there, it goes into the potential number of customers, and then the sort of mass, as we say, the weight of the nappies being collected. And then at the top of our page 8, I don't know what page that is here. So the assumptions are made, and then the benchmarking that Ewan undertook was to basically then cross-reference, right? This is what we've come up with. We've sort of estimated a total number of customers that may need or may require VHP products. The assumption that 60% of those people would actually use a service if offered, and the mass. So 607 tons collected from 3,201 properties. And of those properties, of those 607 of those 3,201 properties, then 607 tons estimation equates to 190 kilograms per year. So as a test, then the sort of litmus test in it was, well, how does that compare with the number of registered customers that a number of authorities have, referenced against the total tonnage that they collect? So we were able to access the number of customers. So if you can see, it's table 4 on our page 8, on page 8 of the report.
Right.
So what you got there for Blaenau Gwent, Bridgend, Gwynedd, Rhondda Cynon Taf, Comyn, Swansea, we had access to the registered number of users, and then through waste data flow, which is a sort of portal which all authorities have to report their waste data. You can see the tonnages that they reported every year. There is a reasonable sort of difference there, but the average of those was 181 kilograms. So when you compare that to 190, sort of makes you think that the assumption there is as good an average really as you can get.
Right. And I'm on page 14, which is the top of that page.
That's page 6 for you, Owen.
Oh, right, there we are. Third paragraph down, again, you for the modelling undertaken, it is assumed 60% of potential users would sign up to the service if offered, a total of 3,201. With a population which was quoted in here, or the next report rather, sorry, the current population of Merthyr Tydfil is 60,424. So again, it's an assumed potential users using what you explained already, and you don't think that the uptake would be anything more than 3,200.
Yes, it's 3,200 households, so we're assuming one person generating per household.
Or households, right?
So out of 30,000 or 32,000 households.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, this is, modelling is never going to be absolutely perfect. No. We do have to make reasonable assumptions where data doesn't exist, and this is ultimately what we've done. It's not an uncommon thing to do.
Did you obtain the number of residential properties currently in the County Borough of Merthyr Tydfil?
We take that data from Stats Wales. Right,
27,300 odd at the moment. So you've obviously used that figure. I think, yeah. I'm Chair. I'm toward the end of my. I am at the end of my questions now. Page 21. Perhaps Judith, you could tell us what page that is for the gentleman.
Yeah, that's page 13.
Right. Can somebody explain in the fourth paragraph down what IBA is?
IBA is incinerator bottom ash, councillor. So that's basically your current residual waste is going for energy from waste.
Yeah.
For every sort of ton of material that goes through energy from waste,
Yeah.
you'll get 20% of that will be incinerator bottom ash, and authorities can claim that as being recycled.
Right. And on that same page, there is a little block at the bottom there. It's table 9, AHP recovery and performance. Can you explain to me the columns going from 54% to 30%? Is that a combination of information you've had from the 8 authorities who currently run this service?
So I answered that way. No, it's basically the current that row is the recovery rate from the material. So every ton sent to that reprocessor, 54% is currently recycled. So that's the left-hand side column. The other columns there are just what if almost. So what if the recovery rate was lower, and that would show the subsequent impact on the overall performance gain for the authority. Right. I think that's basically there because there is a degree of uncertainty as to sort of the robustness of that 54% recovery rate from that particular technology provider. So it's just a what if. What if that recovery rate was lower than 54 as is currently? What if it was 30%? What impact that would have on your overall recycling rate?
If I may add into that, councillor, as well, just as an indication, I mean, when the process started up, I think the claimed recycling rate from nappy cycle was in excess of 70%. So it's already dropped down to 54%. And as I say, some of the processing there may not be always classified perhaps as recycling. It's perhaps more of the processing that is allowing that recycling rate at the moment. So we don't give a bit of caution around that rate.
We don't really know then why the rate was 70% and it's dropped down. We don't know. Am I right in saying you don't know all the reasons why the rate would have dropped down?
Well, the rate it depends on what the regulator NRW will allow, so it depends on what they count as being recycled or not. It's depending on the definition. The process doesn't change.
Right.
It's the definitions. What's allowed and what's not allowed to be counted as recycled.
Okay. And on page 22, which I think is the next page over from where we are, on the third paragraph down, it says it is assumed that the model and that the material would be processed at the nappy recycle facility at Ammerford. However, the capacity for the facility to accept the waste has not been assessed. It must be noted that at present there is no alternative nappy recycling facilities in the UK. So am I right in saying you haven't been in touch with the nappy cycle facility at all?
No, I mean it's not really. That's a conversation I think the authority would probably need to have with the provider. I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for us to explore in some of this stage.
Right, and I'll finish now, Chair, and thank you for your indulgence. But in RCT, you in your presentation you indicated because RCT is currently running this service and it's the second largest authority in Wales. They were looking, I presume, to have a facility there, waste facility, that would cover a number of authorities in the area, but that doesn't seem to have gone anywhere then.
No, so it was a joint facility, a sort of regional, sub-regional facility. The development which and sort of assessment of which was being led by local partnerships. They did actually go out to tender to try and find a technology provider. So this was based at Bryn Peak. obviously not far away.
Exactly.
I think 2 providers came back, and in the end, neither proceeded through to actually deliver the facility. So again, just to stress, really, there is, you know, a sort of risk about the long-term viability of certainly of having potential other technology providers over and above the one that's in place at the moment.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you, Clive. Councillor David Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit curious about the 20% bottom ash figure. The figures I remember from a few years ago were as low as 3% bottom ash allowance on our against our recycling. Where did the 20% figure come from?
Should I answer? So I'd imagine the contribution to the overall recycling rate for the authority is about 3 to 5%. But basically for every tonne that goes through the energy from waste facility, about 20% of that can be counted towards your recycling rate. So it's not 20% of your overall recycling rate. It's so that would be about 3 to 5%, depending on.
Can you explain that again for me, please, Ivan?
Yeah, so basically for every tonne that goes through Project Where the incinerator, about 20% of that can be counted towards your recycling rate as an authority. But obviously not all of your waste goes through that incinerator. You know, the vast proportion is recycled. So the contribution to your overall recycling rate as an authority from the IBA, it would be about 3 to 5%, something along those lines.
Right, thank you. I've been confused previously. When you mentioned a bulking site, and again, I don't know if this is still in the authority's ownership, but there was a unit up on Pengandi, perhaps Judith can answer. It was a site that previously was licensed for bulking. Was that considered?
We haven't considered it in this paper. I mean, the paper was more geared towards the collection side. But you know, we acknowledge that you know, if the bulking were to be done in house, there'd be additional costs, you know, that you would have to factor in. But it was mainly we chose the 3 nominal sites to base our collections modelling from. Yeah,
but if there was a bulking site available, then transport costs would be different, surely.
The transport cost, we worked out a cost to transport the bulk material from a nominal site within the authority area to the facility in Ammanford. So that was about 26,000 that we looked at. The collections would be different, you know, because you wouldn't have that long haul if you were directly tipping in Ammanford. But it's one of those things where it doesn't go. You'd still need 2 vehicles, if you see what I mean. It goes, so instead of having the equivalent of 1.7 vehicles for direct tipping, it goes down to 1.2. So you still need 2 vehicles, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about 2 vehicles, but those vehicles then are not travelling to Ammanford.
No.
You know, they'd be going up to the top of Dowless, parking up, which makes their work time longer, or potential work time longer. It would mean that there'd be more time to do the rounds and less maintenance and fuel, I would imagine. Offset, of course, by the whatever size dinosaur you put in for the bulk waste.
Yes, so, I mean, the greater element of the cost is the labour for any of these collections. So, you know, unless you reduce the number of people actually working on it, then the costs are going to be broadly similar. Fuel is only a relatively small contributor overall. But what you would have to factor in is the cost of operating, licensing, and developing any facility. So as I say, I mean, if that was something the authority wanted to pursue, you probably need to look at that in more detail.
But you'd also be adding in council additional labour then, because you'd need to staff that facility with additional people as well.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So yeah, in all likelihood, on top of that £26,000 haulage cost, you'd be looking at considerably more then, because you'd have people working at the facility, as Ewan said. You'd have the permitting costs, ongoing maintenance costs at that facility too. So yeah, I think the assumption we came to is because there was only 1.2 vehicles required for tipping in Merthyr. If you were to run an operation and tip in Merthyr, those collection crews would only be working 0.6 of their working day, so basically 4 hours. They'd collect for 4 hours, tip off within the authority, and then we had questions about what they'd really do for the rest of the working day. So to eliminate that additional cost, what we really felt was it was sort of more sensible in this instance to actually direct deliver and utilise their available time to go to Ammanford and back, although I very much accept what you're saying about the additional wear and tear on the vehicles.
Yeah, okay, I understand that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Any other councillors? No, I've got a cut. Oh, Clive?
Yeah, sorry. This question is for Judith, particularly. On page 11, and that's headed the background, one of the paragraphs says there, for householders experience capacity issues in their residual bin, for example, those with large families, the authority does offer the possibility of providing them with a larger bin to accommodate the additional volume of waste generated. My experience, and that was confirmed in our pre-meeting with other councillors, is that where, for example, a household has got twins or two young babies, ages close together, the hoops they've got to run through to get a larger bin is not surmountable for some of these families. It's not a particularly easy process, is what I'm saying, Judith, that councillors have experienced.
I think, all I can say in response to that is that there is a process in place, whether or not I describe it as hoops to go through. The process is the same, however the number of people at home. I'm sure Steve can give you more details in terms of the actual steps in the process. But I think what we have to remember, and it's key to all of this, is the reason for it all, and the reason for that process for giving extra capacity bins. Obviously, we're trying to encourage maximum recycling from everyone. So the reason that we do go through that quite stringently is to ensure that people are recycling as much as they can, to ensure, as Owen alluded to at the very start of the presentation, there is capacity then within your residual bin for these AHP products. I don't know if you want us to go into more detail on the actual process.
Well, as I said, our experience is that it's pretty difficult for people, parents of young children, young babies. They got to make a request. I understand why the process is there, but it'd be very interesting. Out of 27,300 households that we got in Merthyr Tydfil, perhaps you've got the figures there. How many have actually succeeded in obtaining these larger bins?
Hi, Councillor. Yeah, I can answer that. It's about 300 and something, and I think, as mentioned before, that figure never really varies. The amount of bins we collect back in sort of marries up with the amount of new bins that we go out there with new applications. The application form, I tend to agree that we do ask a number of questions on the application form, but the process is quite simple in the fact that they apply for an application online. Our wardens on collection day will go and visit the property, have a check through the bin, make an assessment whether they warrant a bin or not, and then it's either a successful application or it's unsuccessful.
And that assessment by the wardens, if, for example, somebody's put in that the smaller bin, and I'm saying this You know, I know that things do happen. They've happened to put something that's recyclable in that bin, and it should have gone out in the other bins. I presume that precludes them. That's the end of the sports as far as the application being successful. Is that correct?
No, it's not the end of it. They will fail the application because they had recyclable materials in the bin, whether it's dry recycling or food waste. But we do have an appeals process as well. So there's no additional application form to fill in. It's basically an email or contact us in any way they want. And we will do a second audit. We will explain to them on the first one we found recycling in there and they needed to address that. And we will follow up with a second audit. If the recyclables are not in there on the second audit, then yeah, they'll successfully pass the application.
Okay, thank you.
Did I, Clive? Yeah. Any other councillors? Okay, Stephen, while you're still there, I'll go to you first. And it's a question I had, but I just want clarification on it. Is it only 300 larger capacity bins that are out? It's
just over 300. Yeah, the figure moves a little bit, but only by sort of the odd few bin. As you can appreciate, as children grow the nappies, we remove the bin, or people pass away, we take the bin back in, and that sort of ties up with the amount of new bins that we give out. So that 320 bins sort of stays at that figure permanently, really. Right, I'm a little bit shocked at that, to be honest, because if it's estimated by Ewan and Owain that 3,201 properties will take up this, the AHPs and recycling them. Where are they all going to come from? It's just an odd one. I don't know if that's a question or a comment, to be honest. Yeah, I think what it is we can't make the assumption that everybody who produces AHPs would have an additional capacity bin. On assessment of the application, for instance, it's a family with one child in nappies, they may not require a larger bin, that they might cope adequately with a 140 litre bin. Similarly, with sort of an individual person who produces incontinent waste, they may well cope well with the 140 bin. It is only for the families or residents that do produce quantities of AHPs that just the 140 litre bin won't accommodate. Right, so I got a bit of a comment and then I got a question, probably for Owen. So really, if we want to get up to the 3,201 people, which is the 60% the guys mentioned, to take up this service, we really need people, residents out there that are really conscious about the environment and that, because there's no incentive really for them unless they want to help the environment. But I've got a little question for Owain. As part of the reports you do for RAP, do you engage with residents to ask them why that 40% of people don't take up the service?
We don't know. I mean, this is based on sort of desktop assumptions, to be honest with you, Councillor. But one thing I was just checking, we did a separate report for the authority based around its sort of waste arisings across all sorts, across all its waste. I did refer to it earlier. I'm looking at it now, and basically the authority is producing from its 140 litre we've been collected every fortnight. The authority is producing on average 332 kilograms per household per year of residual waste. Against it's actually quite anomalously high, because that's against the All Wales average of 264 kilograms, with the best authority actually only reporting 184 kilograms. So the authority with the lowest residual arisings in Wales is basically producing just about 50% of black bag waste than Merthyr is. So what that indicates to us is that the current provision of that 140 litre bin every fortnight isn't restricting households sufficiently enough to get them all to recycle. That's generally one of the sort of strongest tools that authorities have to sort of drive the recycling rates up, and that's what's been implemented. That's how the best performing authorities are achieving the high recycling rates, is through a tight restriction of residual waste. So seemingly without that in place at the moment, with the current service as tight as other authorities, it probably means that, as I say, if people are recycling a bit, then they would have capacity for their AHPs to go in the bin at the moment, and they're not necessarily compelled to use a separate collection, because there is that capacity provided they recycle. So it's a bit of a balancing act for the authority there. There is a fair bit of variation actually, across Wales, and I think it's slightly difficult. It's seemingly that the authorities that do advertise a service more have historically had more customers. But again, when you look at that total mass that was estimated, we're pretty confident with that. I think perhaps one of the questions around what as Ewan raised is whether you might have more or less customers, but we've got a good degree of confidence around the mass that would be produced, the weight.
Thank you, Owen. What you said there is very interesting. And my next question, I hope it doesn't end up in the newspapers, to be honest, but I'm going to skip forwards, because one of the things we've got to ask today is, and this is for Judith, this is Paul and Stephen, is that we want to gain clarity on current and future plans. Now, if we're producing a lot more waste, black bag waste than other local authorities, that is what you said before you, yeah.
Yes, comparative, yeah.
How do the three people I mentioned, Paul, Judith, and Stephen, how do we stop that? How do we reduce that? Does that mean, and I'm not even going to say it, to be honest.
Go on, say it. Monthly collections?
Yes, that sort of thing. 3 weekly and monthly is, this is that the way forward?
It could be a way forward, but obviously, because in 2015, when we went to the 140 litre bin every fortnight, when a couple of the other authorities, if they are monthly collections and they have got the 240 litre bins, I think it'd be very hard for the authority to go monthly collections on a 140. I think it'd be practically impossible. The only other way is to encourage more people to recycle and take the black bag, take the waste out of the black bag and back into the recycling stream. And this is what we're trying to do, obviously, with the help of the councillors and the funding we've had, is with the behavioural change officer, who is going to start in April. Other than that, that's all we can do is keep on pecking away with it, with the wardens going round, trying to get the electricals out, trying to get the food out, trying to get the heavy material out of our black bin.
Okay, Judith, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to say, in terms of our strategy moving forward, which I think is what you were asking, we're working with RAP to look at our performance and efficiency, as Owen mentioned at the start of the presentation. This is just one stream of that. So, they are looking at, focusing on why our residual horizons are so high, and what we can do about that.
Okay, so just for clarity, we're looking at using the waste warden when he comes in April.
Behavioural change officer.
Sorry, we got waste wardens, the behavioural change officer in April. More education, really, and we're definitely not going down the route of monthly collections. So that's great for people to know. Owen, sorry, this is for Ewan. Ewan, in the performance increase section of your report, did you engage with Nappy Cycle on that? Because when I engaged with Rob Hoyer from Nappy Cycle in June of this year, he said that the recovery figures were between 65 and 70%, and not the 54% in the report. And then he also said that going on that, bearing in mind his figures, where you said 601 tons would be taken away from land. Sorry, 601 tons. He was saying 686. He said there was a 2% increase in Merthyr Tydfil's recycling rates. So, did you engage with Nappy Cycle, or has Natural Resources Wales changed their figures since June?
I haven't spoken to NappyCycle. I've calculated the recovery rate from the waste data flow portal. So that's basically where each local authority reports the end destinations of their materials and what's recycled and what isn't. So we took a sample and for the rolling 12-month period before we wrote this report, it was 54%. So as I say, I haven't spoken to NAPSI. I didn't feel appropriate for me to speak to them, to be honest, in this situation. But we looked at the available data from waste data flow, and that was 54% recovery. That 54% recovery then, if you take into account all of the inputs and outputs from your waste flows, that contributes 0.7%. It could be that the 2% figure, because you have to be careful not to double count the incinerator bottom ash element. So you have to take one from the other. So you're reducing the tonnage going through your through the incinerator, the energy from waste facility. So you can't count that IBA twice, if you see what I mean, because you're taking it away. So that's why it's probably slightly lower than the figures that you've been quoted, I suspect.
Okay, cheers, Ewan. Next question I've got, this for Judith, really, Paul and Stephen again, and it's if we've heard through the report, lots of long-term risks in regards to the recycling numbers, and bearing in mind £250,000, lots of money if we wanted to go forward with these plans. So just for clarity, is this something that we're looking to go forward with? You know, in your opinion, from our officers?
Based on the evidence that RAP have presented at this time, I don't think the performance that we would get out of it would be beneficial for us for that amount of investment. I think, you know, obviously we've got to be very prudent in any investment we make, and it has to give payback in terms of our recycling target. So in terms of our strategy at the moment, no, it wouldn't be something that I would recommend. I don't know if Paul or Steve got anything to add to that.
No, not really. The only thing I will add to it is from talking to a couple of colleagues in RCT, one who have now finished. His very words was to stay away from it as long as possible. Like I say, the figures are £250,000 per annum, and that is with direct taking out stuff direct to Ammanford, which I'm very dubious about the travelling time and what have you. But you know, if we were like Councillor Jones said, if we were good to open something up in Pengendee as a bulking station, then there's so many hoops we have to jump through with the NRW with regards to the permitting, a competent officer on site for at least 80% of his working week. We'd have to have loaders, we'd have to have JCBs up there to be able to fill the skips to bulk it, to take it down to Ammanford. Like you say, at the moment, I think it's a lot of money to spend when we don't seem to be having a lot of problems with nappies at the moment. I don't know if the councillors are having a lot of complaints about them, but as an officer, we don't seem to be having a lot of complaints coming through our stream.
Okay, cheers, guys. My last question, well, Paul's probably answered it, really. I was going to ask, obviously the price that the guys have written in their reports is quite high, 250,000. Had we asked another local authority, because we're working better with them now, to give us a price on this kind of service?
I haven't spoken to anybody about giving us a price for doing this service. No, we haven't spoken to anybody about bulking, because obviously this material is very contentious. So I'd be very dubious if our other councils would want to take it off us. But like we say, we got the option of direct delivering to Ammanford, which is in the report.
Lovely, thank you, Paul. As I said, I was almost hesitant to answer that question. To be honest, it's quite disappointing, to be honest, and really. I think Councillor Malcolm Colburn has got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to comment really on what Paul said, was the nappies in bins aren't a big problem from the officer's point of view. I appreciate what he's saying there, but those of us that do litter picks regularly and clear up fly tippings, there's an awful lot of nappies end up in fly tipping, and it's not a pleasant thing when you have to go around and pick them up. So I don't know if having the nappy collection would solve the problem, or if the people that fly tip will fly tip them anyway. I don't know, but it is a problem out in the country, and it's not a pleasant thing to have to clear up.
Judith, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on that point, really, in terms of, we want to ensure that our citizens have got the means of disposing their waste. I take Malcolm Colburn's point about nappies, being fly tipped, but I think we've got to remember residents have got the opportunity to dispose of those nappies in their bins at the moment, just by giving them a different receptacle to dispose of them. I'm not sure that would make a difference. I think the point to remember is, and what we've got to continue to drive home is the need to recycle, because if you do that, then there is sufficient room in your residual waste. I can speak from that personally. I live in an authority that does have an AHP collection, and I also have a baby in nappies, but I don't use the AHP collection, because if you recycle, there's enough room in your residual bin for your nappies. So I think we've just got to be mindful of that, it's the message about recycling that we need to keep pushing.
Lovely, thank you, Judith. Jeremy, did you have a question?
Yeah, just follow on what Malcolm said. Obviously, some of us who do go out there litter picking and picking up big fly tipping and all that. We do find a lot of nappies, and I mean a lot of nappies. It's so it is a problem along the line somewhere, isn't it?
Lovely. Clive, did you have a question, or are we going on to comments?
No, it's a question. It's a very quick one, and anyone I'm sure can answer. In RCT, for example, they use bags, I understand, to collect nappies. So I presume RCT are on a fortnightly collection. So if they put in bags, they've got to be kept somewhere. So if households got 1, 2 or more young children, babies in nappies, they've got to store these somewhere. So I presume that the bags are, robust and able to take these, but they've got to store them somewhere. Is that correct?
As I answer, I mean, what we modelled, we'd used like a tiger stripe type bag. So they tend to be generally high spec kind of a bag, similar to what you'd use for clinical waste type thing. But obviously, that choice will be up to the service providers in the end.
Yeah, but as a grandparent, I've experienced the number of nappies that they can use in a 24-hour period is a hell of a lot. So they would have to be, if they ever went over the system, they'd have to be in bags. And I presume you'd have more than one bag, so that would be having kept in the household somewhere.
Clive, did you have any more? I just got to follow on from that one. Do you think that people are put off because it's 60% of households have used the service in other local authorities? Do you think people are put off by using bags instead of bins? And that's for Owain and you. And I don't know if you've had any feedback from residents on that. I don't know if I asked that earlier. And then one for our officers. Would we have to pay for bins, or is there Welsh Government funding out there if we want to actually go for rigid containers?
In terms of science, the first one, I mean, we haven't really got any satisfaction surveys that I'm aware of, or comparative satisfaction surveys against bins versus bags. I think I'm right in saying that bags are definitely the more prevalent method of containment. I'm right in saying that, and even there's only a handful of authorities using bins.
Yes, but we have modelled costs with a bin and a caddy as well. Not in this report, but in for other authorities. So that could be something if you wanted additional cost factored in, something we can do. But yeah, it's each service provider would probably will offer something slightly different. So
the software intelligence we have, the one bags, is basically it's very much easier and quicker to ensure that the people who have got the AHP collections are only putting AHPs out, when you can just actually see the bag, pick it up. You know, it's very obvious that then it's only your target materials, because the last thing that you want is people to apply for the AHP service and just use it then as a subsidiary refuse collection and start putting non-recyclable or their recyclable materials in there and using it to sort of double up their capacity for residual waste.
With regards to funding, Councillor Salmon, obviously we'd have to apply for any funding, but I don't know of any funding at the moment to run a service such as AHP service.
Okay. Paul, were Welsh Government looking at a project to do this themselves at one time? Natural recycling?
Yeah, they were. That's what Owain referred to earlier when he said that there were two, I think, two tenders for it, but they didn't carry them forward.
Okay. Okay. Has anybody else got any questions? Okay. Any comment?
Yes,
any
one
questions
question,
or comments?
Sorry, one question, Chair.
Yeah.
Other than the 8 or 9 authorities that currently carry out this service, and obviously Merthyr Tydfil, are any of the other authorities looking to assess this other than those ones, please?
I'm not aware of any at the moment, to be honest with you, and I don't know.
Again, I mean, they're all at different stages, I think, and some will want to do it as a recycling thing, some want to do it as to enable greater residual restriction. So the motives for doing it are probably different as well. But there's no sort of consensus out there, I don't think.
Thank you, David. No more questions. Any comments from anyone? Okay, I've got one. As I mentioned earlier, I'm quite disappointed, to be honest, that it's not looking as if we're going to go forward with this. Obviously, you've got to take money into consideration. You just can't spend money on anything. I do think though that maybe Welsh government need to take the bull by the horns, as they say, and deal maybe with the manufacturers of these products as well to make them easier to recycle, or come up with something, because all these products they're being burned or going to landfill, and it's just not good for the environment. Anybody else? No. Okay, Clive.
Well, just very quickly, I agree with you, Chair. I mean, I can't believe that this is not going to be seriously looked at in the future. Having read the report, there seems to be, and I don't think this is not deliberate, I'm not blaming the authors of the report, but there seems to be, again, all sorts of difficulties and barriers of ever doing this, and I can't believe that at some stage in the not too distant future that this is a matter which I believe will have to be coordinated between the Welsh Government and the Welsh Local Government Association. In my view, we cannot go on putting incontinent pads and nappies and other items in the wheelie bins. It just shouldn't be happening in this day and age.
Completely agree, Clive. Okay, thank you very much for presenting the report, guys, and answering the questions. That's Owain and Ewan, and also to Judith, Paul, and Stephen. Owain and Ewan, you can go now if you like. You can stay and watch the rest of the committee if you want, but it's entirely up to you. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go on to agenda item number 4, which is the replacement LDP annual monitoring report 2021, and I think it's Craig Watkins, I think, is going to present.
Afternoon all. The replacement local development plan was adopted back in January 2020, and in accordance with the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, we're required to prepare an annual monitoring report after the first full 12 months monitoring period following adoption. The report in front of scrutiny today represents the first AMR for the replacement LDP and covers the period the 1st of April 2020 till the 31st of March 2021. The report has 2 primary roles. Firstly, to consider whether the implementation of the policies identified in the framework have been effective, and secondly, whether the plan as a whole is working successfully. The 2021 AMR indicates that most aspects of the plan and strategy are working well, and that the policies of the plan are being implemented effectively, with housing delivery being broadly at the level required at this point in the plan period, particularly with targets being met in relation to affordable housing and the number of dwellings built in the other growth areas. The majority of development has been permitted on previously developed land. The town centre has a lower vacancy rate than the Welsh average at the moment. The policies that seek to protect environmental and historic designations have been implemented effectively, with no developments granted contrary to the relevant policies. And the target for electricity generating renewable energy development has been met for 2021. There are some aspects of the plan that are not working as well, including targets not being met in relation to the delivery of employment land and the number of jobs associated with that. A target hasn't been met in relation to the improvement of priority open spaces that use funding gained through the planning system, and the target for heat generating renewable energy development across the county borough hasn't been met. It's encouraging that the strategy and the policies of the plan have been working since adoption in 2020. However, there are indications that housing delivery and the delivery of employment land may require particular focus over the next few years to ensure that they come forward as required. And obviously the other sort of wider contextual issue to consider over the first monitoring period of the plan has been the COVID-19 pandemic. And it'll be important to look at the data, not just for this monitoring report in isolation, but to look at trends and longer term impacts, especially as the plan runs up until 2031. That summarises the report. Chair.
Craig, thank you very much for that. We're going to members for questions, and Clive got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Could I ask Craig on page 48 of the report? It may be page 20, I think, on yours.
Yep, I've got the same numbers as you.
Right, okay. On the very bottom there, it refers under the heading performance outcome, 88 Class B jobs delivered at January 2020. What are Class B jobs?
Yeah, Class B jobs are in relation to when development occurs that's in B classes. It's general industrial use, and it's what the employment land in the plan is allocated for. There's 3 B uses: B1, B2, B8. B1 includes uses such as sort of high-tech research offices and some other office space. B2 is your sort of more general industrial type manufacturing uses, and B8 then generally is sort of storage and distribution. But that's essentially what B uses are.
Right. Thank you for that. That explains it. And as you say, the report refers to the fact that we need to up our game as far as employment land availability is concerned, open spaces and housing. As far as housing is concerned, I think that the fact that we've had the pandemic going on now for 21 months has particularly interfered with that and delayed, increased housing building. I mean, that's a fact of life that's affected the whole of the United Kingdom. But how are we then going to reach the targets for employment land, which is obviously very important, and in relation to the open spaces question?
Yeah, in terms of the employment land, the actual sort of hectares to be delivered and the jobs to be delivered as well are related to the 4 allocated sites that we've got in the plan, which are Courtmill Road, the land on the other side of the slip road at Fossa Fran, the Hoover car park, and then land south of Merthyr Tydfil Industrial Park. So with regards to employment, it does tend to be that things do tend to get delivered in big chunks, whereas the housing can be sort of a more steady stream where we know we might have, say, between 80 and 120 houses built sort of fairly steadily every year. The employment allocations do tend to be sort of delivered more infrequently, and sort of as a big hit, like I'm sure you're aware, there's a pre-application inquiry in now for the land at Courtmill Road, which, if that was to come forward, if that was deemed acceptable, that would deliver nearly half of our total employment land.
Right.
So they do tend to come forward in slightly different ways. With regards to the open space, like I said, there has been money spent on a couple of open spaces during the monitoring period, but they haven't been spent on some of the larger open spaces that are identified as priorities in the open space strategy from 2016. I think part of this is because, again, delay in relation to the sort of slightly lower levels of house building and the sort of pandemic slowing everything down. We haven't had as much SIL or Section 106 funding in the last couple of years as we would have hoped. Hopefully now, as those do pick back up over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, like 12 to 18 months, we are due sort of several hundred thousands of pounds in from developments such as the St Ivors Hospital site, which has got permission now, the site that was approved up in Trevechan for 40 dwellings last year. And then once we have a larger amount of sort of planning funding in, we should be able to then sort of spend it more meaningfully on the priority open spaces. Although with regards to the sort of open spaces on a wider point, we are now due to be reviewing the open space strategy. So some of those priorities may change as we review that strategy and look to update that as well.
So just to further expand that, are we relying on the SIL monies essentially to up the target on the open spaces?
Not necessarily. I know there's been a capital programme approved recently that I think my understanding is it should look to basically refurbish 3 or 4 the council playgrounds a year. Yes. Over the next 3 to 4 years. So what we'd be looking to do is to work in conjunction with the Parks Department to, like, it's the joint approach is going to be key to ensuring that the money is spent sort of on the priority open spaces, and that if we do end up in a scenario where we have sort of less playgrounds as a whole across the borough, that they end up in the right place, and then rather than having sort of, say, 2 or 3 smaller playgrounds across a community, a larger play facility is located within a wider priority open space to ensure that everything sort of ties in together.
So that would, you have to take into account then that the number of playgrounds we got, which I think is about 50 odd in the recent report, some of those will likely be rejigged, and that then will be taken into account for the target.
Yeah, certainly. Like certainly, if the playgrounds are part of a priority open space,
yeah,
so the priority open spaces tend to be sort of larger areas that might have a playground in them, a mugger, just a wide area of sort of natural green space as well. If we then use SIL or Section 106 money to top up the capital spend that Rob and his department are looking at, then that will contribute towards the target. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Clive. Any other members got questions? Okay, I got to. Oh, hold on. Councillor David Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My system seems to be operating very slowly. Chris, you mentioned the Goat Mill Road. Was half of that originally designated for housing?
At one point, it was. I think there was a master plan drawn up. I think it was called Outlook Village at the time. I think it was sort of being marketed at, but that was probably 2006, 2008. It was that long ago now. But I think when we reviewed the LDP and we're preparing the new replacement plan now, I think it was felt that it'd be more beneficial to sort of keep that area as an employment site as a whole, and with the combination of the housing sites we've got across the rest of the county borough, and with the lower level of housing growth, or the housing target being lower than the previous plan, the site wasn't needed for housing. So that's essentially why it. But it was at one point earmarked for housing previously. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I do have a second question. Since the LDP was developed, has there been new legislation regarding well-being and green and open spaces?
We started preparing the replacement plan in 2016, and I think it was around about that time that the sort of Wellbeing and Future Generations Act was published. I think it was pretty much the same time as we were starting out, and so that has been factored in all the way through LDP preparation, and in terms of the goals that sort of run all the way through that legislation. And I think you can see, which was funny, a question that Declan was asking me this morning, the numbers for the individual policies in the plan, where it's SW1 or ECW5 or whatever, they've basically been categorised by the wellbeing goals in terms of the policies related to social wellbeing, economic wellbeing, environmental wellbeing, and cultural wellbeing. But as things tend to do, there probably is now an even greater emphasis on things such as green spaces and the sort of linked into climate change. SAB legislation is coming as well, which will mean that we should end up having more green spaces as sites are developed as well.
That's nice. The increased legislation with regard to climate change, etc., is that not going to make it more difficult to look at some of the developments in the near future and the longer term?
Potentially, like I said, I think with the LDP, I think you have to realise that you do need to strike a balance. And like you said, it's always, the one thing I always quote is what Welsh Government say that the plans should be. They should be aspirational but deliverable. So like I said, you do need to go almost sort of above what because the projections from Merthyr would show the population, I think, remaining stable. If there was no plan, if there's no sort of policy mechanism to sort of look to affect things, the population would remain stable, but then would tail off from sort of 2030 onwards. So you do need to sort of look to try and strike a balance to sort of be an aspirational for the county borough, and ultimately that does require there to be a certain level of population within the borough that generates the demand for certain facilities, such as housing, such as employment, land, such. You need to have enough people to keep, or maybe to sort of attract investment in terms of public transport as well, those sorts of issues. But the balance is then, like you said, making sure that we don't build on every green space that we've got available just because it's attractive for developers to build on those sites. But I think what we've done with the plan this time around, whereas we've dropped from looking to build nearly 4,000 houses over 15 years, we've dropped to looking to build just over 2,000. So what we have done is it does give us that flexibility then to sort of not build on every patch of green land that is available, and it also gives us a bit more scope then to look at the sort of quality of development as well, and make sure things are developed as they should be, rather than if there was the pressure to build 4,000 houses rather than 2,000, you're almost to the point in saying, well, actually, we just need to get these houses up as quick as possible to sort of meet the need. Whereas now we've got a bit more time to sort of look at things in more detail and ensure things are happening as well as they can.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I actually sympathise with you officers in that it is going to be difficult I see some difficult times ahead. The other thing I will agree with what you said is that once it's been built on, it's never going to be green again. So thank you very much for that, Chris, and thank you for comprehensive answers.
Thank you, David. Difficult times ahead. I've got a couple of questions, Craig. Now, obviously, people are becoming more aware of biodiversity and everyone's responsibility towards the environment. Now, on page 27 of the monitoring report, it's 4 lines. I'm just going to read it out. But basically, it mentions that the higher level of completions are likely to be delivered through developments such as the former St Tidvil's Hospital, which is going ahead, obviously, and then Tynerodden. Now, given that the proposed development at Tynerodden is for 131 houses, and there's a fair amount of opposition to it now, and it seems to be growing. And I've got to be careful with this because I actually sit on the planning committee. What would be the consequence for the local development plan and the local authority if this development didn't go ahead?
With regards to the Tynerodden site, as it's allocated in the plan, the principle of residential development has been accepted on the site. So if we were looking to, say, refuse that development, we would have to have some very good reasons to do so. But in my opinion, it shouldn't come to that on that site. Again, the plan inspector would have found it sound that site can accommodate. I think we've actually got allocated 120, so that there are a few more dwellings proposed on there. But in terms of the exact layout of the site and whether it might end up with slightly less dwellings than are proposed, that should be something then that should be done through the plan application process when it's in at the moment. If we feel the design or the layout of the site or some of the house types, or where there's an over concentration of development in certain proportions of the site, that is something that we could look to address through the application. But we would struggle to refuse the development on the actual principle of developing the site for residential development. I said the plan has only been adopted not even 2 years yet, and at that point the sites are allocated for residential development were found to be sound. If the site doesn't come forward for whatever reason, if someone pulled out or something else happened, we have enough flexibility in the plan and the sort of number of sites we've got in there to sort of meet the target by the end of the plan period. But obviously, as we envisage the Tynerodden site coming forward in the sort of short to medium term, we would look to do things like maybe market other sites that we own to sort of bring them forward to sort of plug the gap over the next couple of years.
Okay, cheers, Craig. So there are alternatives if it didn't work out. Now on page 29 of the monitoring report, it goes into detail about the amount of houses being deliverable and that sort of thing. Now the replacement LDP was implemented in 2020 and was obviously available for everyone to view and comment on for a certain time period, and quite a considerable time period, I believe. How long?
There's the sort of whole plan preparation process took 3.5 years from starting, and there are 2 main stages of public consultation, which both last for 6 weeks. I think one of ours lasted longer because it ran over Christmas holidays or school holidays or something like that. The initial stage of public consultation looks at preferred strategy stage, which looks at the sort of broad strategy of what you want the plan to do, sort of that sort of detail. And then at the deposit version is essentially a full draft of the plan where people can then comment on the sort of detailed elements that we're looking to take forward in the LDP.
Okay, this is one. Now, bearing in mind, to be honest, is a lot of the public don't know what a local development plan is, and that included councillors, to be honest, because I was newly elected in 2017. I know a lot of other councillors wouldn't have been aware of the process, to be honest. We had the issues then in my own area, to be honest, with East Street, which was for a small development. Obviously, was in the LDP. It was recommended by officers to go forward with that. Is there scope for areas that are set aside in the LDP for the building of houses to be taken out and replaced with something else?
That wouldn't. Sorry. No, go on. Sorry.
No, just bearing in mind that the LDP plan is up to the year 2030.
Yeah, it's up. Yeah, the plan period finishes in 2031, but after 4 years after adoption, there's a statutory requirement to carry out a review of the LDP, which is what happened with the sort of previous LDP. It was adopted in 2011. The review was carried out in 2015, and the review decided we need to write a new plan. In all likelihood, that is likely to sort of happen again this time around, unless something was to happen within the next year or two that would cause us to review the plan early. However, you are talking something significant in terms of under-delivery. Sort of basically all the greens you could see in the monitoring report would need to go red within the next year or so to cause us to review early. But in terms of changing the designations and allocations on parcel land, that will be done as part of the review, which would sort of be carried out in 2024, and we could potentially then start working a new plan by the end of that year then.
Cheers, Craig. I think it's just unfortunate that a lot of people don't, include myself, didn't understand what the LDP was, didn't know how to get involved, and didn't realise, that there was sites maybe there that maybe were not for the best for residents, from a resident's point of view, maybe not the best sites for certain developments. Okay, has anybody else got any questions? No comments? Bearing in mind, for today's meeting, Scrutiny will firstly consider whether the policies identified in the monitoring framework are being implemented, and secondly, consider whether the plan as a whole is working successfully. I just got a couple of things. It's firstly in regards to SIL money, which is mentioned throughout the report, or in the report, sorry. Is I think I think all of the planning committee, which I sit on, were a little bit disappointed, to be honest, with a recent application development that went through in Treveccan, where no SIL money was collected. I think there was various excuses made by the developer that it wouldn't have been cost effective at the time. I believe that's what they said, but I really do think that we need to maximise that SIL. The SIL money.
Yeah, so if I could just come in quickly there, sorry, yeah. I think with the case with that application, SIL will be payable on the application in Treveccan. It's other Section 106 contributions that are separate. SIL is mandatory, essentially. Once on residential development in the northern half of the borough, it's mandatory. I think the only exceptions are essentially for self-build, people who sort of build their own dwellings, and then for housing associations or any social housing can sort of come off the bill. Like I said, the St David's Hospital site, as an example, the SIL is only chargeable on the open market element of that amount. I think with the scheme in Treveccan, we did look to secure a financial contribution towards affordable housing through Section 106, which again it's a separate regime to SIL, but sort of the same thing. And in that case, because, like I said, there's been as SIL is mandatory, that essentially has to come first, even though there is a big affordable housing is a big priority as well. But also over the last couple of years, there's extra things coming in terms of the building regs requirements have increased, like in terms of sprinklers and sort of costs like that, and they have to be done. The SAB legislation has come in now, and sort of that has to be done as well. I think they're still negotiating the bond on that scheme. But it is one thing that we do need to sort of, particularly as some of the larger sites now do come forward, it is something that we do need to sort of try and capitalise on. Like I said, hopefully with a couple of the larger sites coming forward over the next year or two, we will we will have substantially more sill in the coffers to use over the next few years. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that clarification. The other thing that I just wanted to mention was the policy SW10 and SW11, and it's open spaces. To be honest, everyone is more concerned getting on board with protecting the environment and that sort of thing, and it's like one of the things mentioned in the policy SW10, which is protecting and improving open spaces. The majority of open space can best be retained and enhanced through the redevelopment of a small part of the site, and there's different ones as well. I think maybe, and this is not a council thing, to be honest, I think maybe this needs to be done nationally or something, because I know America is starting to change things where they're not building so much in the suburbs of the big cities, to reduce emissions from cars and that sort of thing, and to really go to use public transport. But I think maybe we need to look at things like this, build smaller developments, with houses and shared use of facilities and the green spaces and things like that. Obviously, that's not a council thing. That would be more a national policy. And I think that's all my comments. Anybody else got any comments? No. Okay. Jeremy, you got your hand up?
Yeah, my comment is straight to the point. Like I've said before, is I think we're going to have a lot of uproar in the community with some of these developments with green spaces. And I remember talking to Judith about it before. But I think we're going to have a lot of backlash for this down the line with this plan.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Right, I think that's the end of that report. Craig, you can go. All officers can go now as well. Thank you very much, Craig, for presenting the report, putting it together, and answering questions as well. Much appreciated.
No problem. Thanks very much.
Okay. Right. Agenda item number 5 is the forward work programme. Today we were supposed to have had a report on children's play areas. This has actually been deferred until the 6th of December in order to accommodate the meeting going over what it was expected to today. Also, in relation to the trade waste recycling report that was due to be reported on in the December scrutiny, Welsh Government have announced that they are delaying the introduction of that legislation to next year, and as such there is nothing to be reported at the moment. Therefore, it would make more sense for that item to be agended next year. Okay. Item agenda number 6 is scrutiny referrals, feedback and follow-up actions. I don't think I have. I may have misled them. Reflection and evaluation of the meeting. To be honest, it has been a little bit disappointing. I was really looking forward to agenda item number 3, which is the absorbent hygiene products. Having a better outlook on that, to be honest, and it was disappointing that it was going to cost so much money, and it's not deemed to be at this time cost effective, to be honest. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same, Doug. It was like just every report we've had to do with nappies is just negative all the time.
Okay. Malcolm?
Yeah, just going to say the same as Jeremy, really. It's just a very negative situation on this, isn't it? So, sorry about the cat. I don't really know what the way forward from this is at this stage. So, back to nappy cycle, see if they can come up with anything else, I guess, is it?
Yeah. David? Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, all in all, seemed a very negative report to me, as I said in the beginning. And to be honest with you, I still don't understand what you once said about 20% recycling being 3% recycling. what? It's something I will pursue elsewhere, but that didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So not particularly happy about that report in particular.
Yeah, Dave, you can chase that up, and you can you can let us know your findings then as well.
Yes, certainly. I'll make sure that the committee is made aware of whatever I didn't understand.
Okay.
Cheers, Dave.
Yeah, I agree with all the comments. I think the report, when we waited for it long enough, and when we had it originally via Judith, it wasn't what we were expecting and wanted. Yes, we've had a report. There were gaps in that, frankly, and I was really disappointed that they hadn't collated, for example, the experiences of the 8 authorities. By the sound of it, they didn't feel that was their remit. So we still don't know what are the exact experiences of the 8 authorities that have, you know, and some of them have been doing this for some years. So it's, I really don't know where this is going to go. I believe, as I've said, it'll have to be something that comes from between the Welsh Local Government Association and the Welsh Government. It's got to happen at some time. You can't go on putting incontinent pads and nappies and all that sort of thing, in my opinion, in black bins in this day and age.
Yeah, completely right.
Quite right, Clive. Quite right.
Yeah.
Very right, Clive.
Okay. Okay. Agenda item number 8. Any other business deemed urgent by the chair? I have none. And I formally declare this meeting closed.
David wants to say something.
Thanks all. See you soon. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. David, did you want to say something?
My comment was following on from Clive's, really.
Sorry.
Especially that Blaenau Gwent is of a similar topography to Merthyr, Merthyr Tydfil.
Yeah.
And figures and evidence should have been available through those, which would have given us a better insight, or a more likely insight into how it would work in Merthyr. Very disappointing in that a bit as well.
Yeah.
As you both said, as everyone has said, they didn't really. It came across as they didn't interact with the local authorities, but it also, they didn't really interact with Nappy Cycle, who were the recyclers, because their figures are different. And he did say that they hadn't contacted him when writing the report. So yeah, disappointing all in all. Okay. I formally declare the meeting closed. Okay.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone. Take care now.
All the best. Bye now.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle.